apocalyptic end-of-the-world themes in the gospel are always a little bit difficult to interpret. This one in particular Mark has represented Jesus as actually telescoping events far and near and present and past, kind of all in the same gospel passage. So I hope to make some kind of sense out of that for you. Besides that, there's always it's always open to some kind of other interpretation. So here, we start in verse 24 of chapter 13 of Mark today, and so then there's like 23 other verses that have been building up to this of what Jesus is saying. So it's all the question of when is the world going to end? When are we going to witness the second coming of Christ? And he's been talking about this and all these signs for a while now, and then we get this portion of it. So Jesus is obviously telling of future disasters for Earth's people. It's the final tribulations at the end of human history. Now, there's going to be a period of unparalleled distress. There will be cosmic upheavals. The sun and moon will be darkened, as it says. Stars will fall from the sky. And he says that the heavenly powers will be shaken when Jesus returns to judge the earth. So in the prophets, if you go back to the prophets and using their imagery, such heavenly disturbances symbolize the earth-shattering impact of God's judgment upon a rebellious city or empire. And so then that, of course, brings, it brings the end of life as they know it. So to bring down the wrath of God on an entire empire or city, this is what these things symbolize from the Old Testament, from the prophets. Now, before we jump into some of these other details, we need to realize, again, as I said, that Mark has telescoped events near and far to show that they are inseparably linked. So it's not that they are unrelated. They are related. In fact, they're totally linked, even though some have already taken place already, and some have taken place during the time of Jesus, and then there are events, of course, taking place even now, since Pentecost. And so those are the three chunks of time, even though in Jewish calculation, 40 years was a generation. We're looking at three different generations used very flexibly, if you will. The time before Jesus, the time of Jesus on earth, and the time after Jesus since Pentecost. And so then this is where it gets confusing, as this generation will not pass away. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. So wait a minute, did it already happen yet? Is it going to happen? What are we still doing here if it's already happened? And so then that's why we need to understand it, that these things do have their proper interpretation in their proper context. So have all these things Jesus is telling about taken place before that generation died? Well, yes and no. Okay, so yes and no. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. If it was really the coming of Christ or the second coming of Christ, we would have missed it already, but we're not going to miss it. No one will miss the second coming of Christ, no matter where we are. Even if we are dead in the grave, we are not going to miss the second coming of Christ. So the first generation, or if you will, the time before Jesus, they have witnessed many wars, uprisings, revolts, false messiah sightings, earthquakes, and famines. All right, so those things have already been happening for a long time, leading up to the time of Jesus, when Jesus took on human flesh, and then he took on that human form. During the lifetime of Jesus, human history has also witnessed false messiah sightings, wonder workers. We have witnessed during the crucifixion of Jesus, the darkened sun, the darkened sun at midday during his crucifixion, and that all happened before that generation died, so they witnessed that. A generation, again, was considered 40 years according to Jewish calculation, but again, we're using it very flexibly when you start looking at the chunk of time before Jesus and the time after Jesus. And of course, the question is, well, are we in the last days yet? Yes. Are we in the end times yet? Yes. We are living in the end times. We are living in the last generation, or the generation after the Pentecost. We have been living in the end times since Pentecost. We are here, all right? This is how long it takes for waiting for Jesus Christ to come back. We're still waiting for that. Now, in the time after Jesus, considering this, if you call it the third generation or the third chunk of time, there was, of course, the Great Jewish War. Now, I'm not sure if anyone has heard about this, the Great Jewish War of 66 to 70 A.D. This, of course, is right after the time of Jesus, right after Pentecost. Zealots took over the temple, and they set it up as their headquarters. They named their own high priest, and then the Jewish armies fought against each other until the Roman Emperor Titus ended this Jewish revolt by bringing the Roman army in and leveling the entire temple and Jerusalem, leaving it as a burning pile of rubble. Of course, that was 70 rubble. That was 70 A.D. So this Jewish war, if you will, this Jewish revolt, it was one of the most devastating calamities in world history. Okay, if you don't know enough about it, it's really kind of nasty what has happened during those short 4 years right there in Jerusalem. So I won't go into those details because they may not be, you may not be ready for it this early in the morning, to tell you the truth. Okay, so the end of the temple, though, so if you look at the end of the temple, this simple fact that the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, that was the end of the world for the Jewish people. It was the end of temple sacrifices. It was literally the end of the Old Testament. It was the end of life as they knew it. All right, so that generation did witness that. They witnessed that end of the world. So the temple then was that center of political religion, political education, and political economics. So these are the two formal institutions of the Jewish culture, are family and temple. All right, so you have one of the formal institutions being destroyed, which was temple. So in the temple area, they had what I call political religion, political education, and political economics. In the home, which was the other formal institution of Jewish society, they had the same things being taught, except it was more like private religion, private education, and private economics. It's just a way to distinguish between what was being taught where. So all these things were being taught, some in the temple area, some privately at home, but the point is that you cut off half of your society in Jewish terms when you destroy the temple, and then you just have the family unit left. So then this was, again, the end of the world as the Jews knew it. So Jesus is not asserting that the end of history would come immediately, even though it sounds like that at first, but rather his passion, and with it, the transition from the old covenant to the new is the beginning of the end. So when they transition from the old covenant to the new covenant in Jesus or after the Pentecost, then we enter the final stage of God's plan for salvation, which will culminate in this new heaven and new earth, and that is the third generation. So again, we are living in the time of the end. We are already here. All right, it doesn't happen instantaneously, but it happens over time still. So Jesus' coming in glory is imminent from the day of his ascension onward. So what is our response? The rest of the gospel introduces this understanding of the fig tree. What should our response be? Okay, so most trees in Palestine are evergreens, but the fig tree has an annual cycle of growing leaves and bearing fruit, marking the season of the year, something we're accustomed to in Michigan. We see the seasons of the year change. We see leaves grow on trees before in springtime, and then during summer, towards the fall, they die. So we are familiar with this kind of cycle. Here, the fig tree is different in Jerusalem or Palestine. Fig trees, they sprout leaves in April, around the time of Passover, Easter, and are a sure sign that summer or harvest time is around the corner. Harvest time, all right, is also a common biblical image for apocalyptic judgment. So there's another theme there that Jesus is hinting at. So he advises his disciples to read the signs of the times. When we see events described here happening, we must know that the end is near, at the gates of the city, that he is that close when these events are happening. So the world is under God's judgment. And depending on how we live our lives depends on whether we ourselves are under God's judgment or under his freedom. So sin, that places us under God's judgment. Disobedience to God and the church's teaching places us under God's judgment, but forgiveness, repentance, obedience to the Lord, that frees us. Okay, so that frees us and places us under his freedom and life. So we live in troubled times. We already know this. How many years how many decades, how many world wars, how many things have happened since the time of Christ? We see disease and destruction, troubled times, war, famine, wildfires. All right, all these things are happening already or have happened, and they will continue to happen. But the gospel does not leave us without hope, okay? Because the people who are obedient to the Lord, the people who are faithful, they will shine like the stars. They are going to be saved. They'll be written in the book of life. They will not arise to everlasting horror and disgrace. Okay, the people who are faithful to the Lord will be placed under his freedom, and so then the gospel does not offer us these readings without knowing that there is hope. And all we have to do, again, is live our religion. The final coming of Christ, the second coming of Christ, will be quick and catch many people unprepared. This much we do know. That's how much we do know, is that, yes, the Lord is coming, and when he does come, it's going to catch many people off guard. There will not be time to prepare for the Lord's coming. So you prepare now, today, every day, all right? And this is what the warning is about the fig tree, if you will, or the lesson from the fig tree. So there won't be any need for anybody to travel anywhere to say, oh yeah, the Lord is over there. The second coming of Christ already came. He's over there in Asia. No, he's over here in Australia. No, when he comes, every single person will see him immediately. All right, and there will not be any more time left to prepare your soul. So our response is to take every day to strive for holiness, because today, whether Jesus comes back today or whether we see Jesus in our own death, we never know when our own day of our death is. We're going to meet him one way or the other. Okay, so today is the day that we begin anew to put our priorities back in order. All right, to put Jesus first in our life, to put the practice of our religion back as number one priority, because these things are true. Now, of course, God desires the salvation of all people. And that's what some people will say, well, how come he hasn't come back yet? And why do bad things still happen to good people? Well, because he's waiting for our wills to change. Do you know how long it takes for the human will to change? Yeah, long time, okay? How long does it take you to change your own human will? All right, that's what the Lord is waiting for. Okay, love is not going to be forced. Love cannot be love if it's going to be forced. So he waits for our wills to change so that we come to him to love him on our own terms. But they should be on his terms. It would be a lot easier if we loved the Lord on his terms and not on our own. And that's where the human will gets so involved in there and gets a little tricky. So our daily goal is a holy life. It's very simple. So that's more of a complex explanation that I want to give you, but this is such an interesting area to study that a lot of people seem to have a lot of questions over it. So I want to spend a little time on it so that you understand more about the apocalypse and the end of the world and how Jesus was interpreting, or how Mark was representing Jesus as interpreting this. But the simple point of all this is Jesus coming back? Yes. When is the time to prepare? Now. Because it might be today, it might be 100 years from now, it might be 1,000 years from now. All right, so then today is the best time to prepare for the Lord's return. We want to be able to, when the Lord does come back, we want to be able to welcome him, not run away from him.